Good evening, I'm Klaudia Czerwińska and you're watching World News Tonight live from Warsaw. I propose a ceasefire until a meeting with Vladimir Putin, says Volodymyr Zelenskyy. And what does Moscow have to say in response? Quote, who negotiates with those who bet on terror? This is the argument used by Vladimir Putin himself. Following the statement, the Russian president spoke with Donald Trump for over an hour. We'll have more on that in just a moment, but first let's take a look at tonight's headlines. Ukraine invited to take part in the upcoming NATO meeting in The Hague. Upon his visit to Berlin, Polish foreign minister pledged the government would retain authority over foreign affairs. Poland set to become a member of the Nordic-Baltic defense framework. It was a good conversation, but not a conversation that will lead to immediate peace. This is how Donald Trump summed up on his conversation with Vladimir Putin. This is a great example of how the battle for Ukraine is fought not only on the front lines, but also in diplomatic settings all across the world. As another meeting in Istanbul came to an end with no major breakthroughs, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy announced he will only meet with Vladimir Putin in person, and until that happens, he offered total ceasefire. Aaron Daman, our chief political correspondent, has this report.
As the frontline fight in Ukraine continues, and after another round of failed peace talks between officials in Istanbul, President Volodymyr Zelenskyy is insisting on talking to Russia's top brass.
They are ready for prisoner exchanges because they need them. We are ready for exchanges too, but to continue diplomatic meetings in Istanbul on the level of people who do not take any decisions is meaningless.
And he's again calling for a ceasefire, this time until he sits down with Russian leader Vladimir Putin face to face.
Why ceasefire before leaders meet? Because we can meet, and if there is no mutual understanding, if there is not desire for de-escalation, then ceasefire will be over the same day. It can be initiated unilaterally by Russians. Please feel free to do so.
But that plea had barely left his lips before Putin was already dismissing the idea, referencing reported attacks on bridges in the Bryansk and Kursk regions over the weekend.
How is it possible to make such a meeting in these conditions? What is there to talk about? How can we negotiate with those who rely on terror, with terrorists?
His comments also come after Ukrainian forces launched a blistering drone attack on air bases deep inside Russia. Even Washington was caught off guard by the secret operation.
Was President Trump informed in advance by Ukraine that the attack is coming?
He was not.
On Wednesday night, US President Donald Trump revealed he'd spoken with Putin for an hour, noting the Kremlin would retaliate against Ukraine and that the conversation would not lead to immediate peace. On top of that, Putin says he and Pope Leo XIV held a phone call, exchanging views on Ukraine. And all still on the same day, Zelenskyy's chief of staff, Andriy Yermak, was in the American capital, meeting with officials from the Trump administration, including Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Ukraine envoy Keith Kellogg, who had a sober warning.
And I'm telling you, the risk levels are going way up. I mean, what happened this weekend, people have to understand in the national security space.
Sadly, I think what's there next is continued fighting. I think from the Russian standpoint, there's a sense that over this summer they can make more gains. The one thing, obviously, they're keeping their eye on is the US Congress. Donald Trump can be a very unpredictable person to have in any negotiation, whether he's on your side or not.
Support from the US could come in the shape of a sanctions bill currently sitting in the Senate, waiting to be voted on. It was introduced by pro-Ukrainian Republican Lindsey Graham and would slam a 500% tariff on imports from countries that purchase Russian energy, though President Trump has yet to grant his endorsement.
We could end up with a standoff not only diplomatically taking place between Ukraine and Russia, but a much more actually active US position to bring pressure on Russia. I'm not sure it'll change anything in Russia's position, but it will mean that the US will be more, if I can call it this way, on Ukraine's side.
In Europe, French President Emmanuel Macron and the Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni are trying to put their differences aside, meeting in Rome despite tensions flaring in recent weeks. One of Macron's top tasks is to convince Meloni of the value of the coalition of the willing, a group of European powers committed to supporting Ukraine. It's that support Zelenskyy will be relying on as the promise of peace appears no closer. Aaron Darman, TVP World.
Ukraine will be invited to a meeting of NATO leaders in The Hague later this month. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte made the announcement earlier today after months of speculation. This development comes as the war-torn country is looking for a way to join the defense alliance against the demands of the Kremlin and skepticism of some NATO members. Our correspondent Alex Cadier reports from NATO headquarters in Brussels.
Well, that question of whether or not Ukraine would join the Hague leaders meeting at the end of June was a burning question. There was speculation for weeks and weeks about whether or not there would be an invite, particularly after the bust-up in the Oval Office between President Zelenskyy, President Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance. That was the big question. Mark Rutte, the Secretary General of NATO, earlier today confirming Ukraine would be there, not confirming who from Ukraine would be there. I was just at a press conference with Rustem Umerov, the Defense Minister of Ukraine. He himself could not confirm who would represent Ukraine at this meeting. The big question, of course, is whether or not President Zelenskyy himself will be there. We heard on TVP World on the record with Adam Yasser from the Deputy Foreign Minister of Poland, Minister Bartoszewski, about this very point. Let's have a listen to what Poland thinks about this.
Should Ukraine be invited to the NATO summit in June?
I think Ukraine should participate. Ukraine has a fantastic army, proved itself in battle. It's the most experienced army now in Europe in terms of battle experience. And we can learn a lot, and NATO could learn a lot, but it's not up to me to give the invitation.
Well, as you can see, some NATO allies, including Poland, very supportive of that invitation because of Ukraine's fight, because of Ukraine's resilience since the start of Russia's full-scale invasion. And we have seen that support right here at NATO headquarters during the meeting of the Ukraine Defence Contact Group. Expressions of support, offers of more military support from the United Kingdom, ramping up its drone production to continue to support Ukrainian efforts on the battlefield. Those efforts, that support from European partners now in sharp focus, of course, following that phone call between President Trump and Vladimir Putin. Clearly, no evident path to peace coming from that conversation, therefore putting the focus again on the battlefield, on building that Ukrainian resilience. On that, the messaging from European leaders has been clear. European ministers here making it very clear for as long as it takes they will continue to stand by Ukraine. But nevertheless, the desire for peace, that desire to move towards a peaceful settlement seems now more important than ever, but also the hope of a peace deal being reached further than ever. Nevertheless, the Ukrainians will be represented at the NATO meeting, which now seems more high stakes than ever before. I'm Alex Cadier at NATO headquarters for TVP World.
This marks a new chapter in the Baltic cooperation on defense. During a NATO meeting set to take place on Thursday, Poland will become a member of NB8, later to be known as NB9 defense framework, which unites Nordic and Baltic nations. The landmark agreement formalizes defense cooperation, including existing capabilities and shared procurement of the parties, making joint military drills and purchases more available. Zuzanna Jurek has more in her report.
Synchronization, cooperation, integration is expected to be the key message emerging from the defense ministers' meeting at the NATO headquarters in Brussels. As Poland is set to join the Nordic-Baltic 8 framework, officially making it the Nordic-Baltic or NB9. The agreement has been in place since the 1990s, with Nordic and Baltic ties spreading across foreign economic and security interests. Now Poland is set to be officially integrated into these structures too, with defense being the primary focus.
We are going to chair the Baltic States Council. Baltic States Countries Council as of, I think, 1st of July. We already cooperate very closely with the Scandinavians. We have common interests and also defense security interests with Sweden and Norway and Finland, giving the Shadow Fleet.
This is also poised to include the establishment of the so-called Baltic Shield, which will formalize the linking of the Baltic defense line developed by the Baltic states of Latvia, Lithuania and Estonia with the Eastern Shield, Prime Minister Donald Tusk's flagship defense project. But the NB9 cooperation is reported to be three-dimensional, with a focus not only on land defenses but also on aerial and naval security assurances. This is driven by an increase in suspected Russian sabotage attempts in the Baltic Sea basin over the last 15 months. These included attacks on critical infrastructure and the cutting of telecommunications cables.
In practical terms, we are coordinating all our activities in terms of surveillance, information exchanges, observation, monitoring, and reaction to potential threats.
Those safeguarding missions, including the Baltic Sentry and Jet Force, are already in place. Under the new agreement, the scope of the naval policing missions is to be expanded, with new leadership roles anticipated. Based off an off-the-record information obtained by TVP World, this might include:
the Swedes have a growing interest in boosting their presence, further based on the sabotage attempts they've been subjected to. The Danes also have amplified their focus on the Baltic Sea, particularly when it comes to securing critical infrastructure around the Baltic states.
Additionally, under the new cooperation, which is set to utilize not just existing capabilities, but also shared procurement, naval defenses, particularly submarines, will be of great interest. Here, partners reportedly plan to apply for the joint procurement loans from the SAFE mechanism, low-interest loans from the EU amounting to approximately 150 billion euros. And according to TVP's sources, there is momentum to ensure that aspirations are acted upon, quickly and robustly.
The current Polish government in particular is aware that its focus needs to be on Brussels and to ensure it acts fast when it comes to accessing the loans. But at the same time, it wants European NATO allies to take over the initiative for the continent's defenses from the US. It knows, however, that this leadership will only be achieved through cooperation and partnership, and so it is likely that Warsaw will push to expedite the loans application process.
According to sources, the overarching goal is to formalize regional mutual security assurances. The agreement is to be signed on June 5th. For TVP World, Zuzanna Jurek.
To learn more, tune in for the full interview with Władysław Bartoszewski, hosted by Adam Yasser in the latest episode of On the Record, coming up right after World News Tonight at 8:30 p.m. here on TVP World. And now, moving on, the Polish president is a representative of the country abroad, and he carries out the policies established by the cabinet, said Polish Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski during a meeting with his German counterpart in Berlin. This response came as reporters wanted to know if Poland's relationship with Germany was due to change after the recent presidential election. As a sign of maintaining active dialogue, foreign ministers revived the Polish-German Forum, which remained dormant for the past 7 years. TVP World's Sasha Farbach made his way to Berlin and has this next report.
Germany and Poland, two countries which share a troubled history, but also one that has moved these countries together on economics, on defense. Now, here at this visit of Radosław Sikorski, the foreign minister of Poland, meeting his counterpart, also here in Berlin, Mr. Wadepool, it was clear that there is very good directions forward. Now, of course, the concern is how would that new president of Poland from the Law and Justice Party, Mr. Nawrocki, impact that relationship?
Please remember that in Poland, just like in Germany, the president isn't the head of government. The Polish president is a representative of the country abroad, and he carries out the policies established by the cabinet. The president also has the power of veto legislation. However, foreign policy is created by the cabinet, and it will not change.
During that bilateral press conference, the two men gave themselves very positive. Now, looking also forward at ties that bind, looking very much at touting the achievements of this relationship on the economy. And Mr. Wadepool spoke also very much of history as well, and talking about reparations and that key issue as well, saying that very much directly how Poland had been a victim of German aggression, and that is something that Germany will never forget. There are talks of more ideas of what could be, and right now, so still an open debate on that whole idea moving forward. But also key points were mentioned, 3 points in fact, that the two foreign ministers talked about today, which were key. First one about more shared air defense for Europe, this being a key move forward for the two countries and for Europe. And also looking at very much praise for Poland for the SAFE instrument. So that was all about building up European defense capability, now spearheaded by the Polish European Council presidency. And then thirdly, also talking about the need for infrastructure, more on that, and rails. Now the foreign minister of Germany saying that these things with roads and rails, really the arteries of defense and the arteries of Europe, and very key for both countries. Now, also addressing the migration issue was also something that both talked about. And it was clear to see that, on one hand, Mr. Sikorski very much said that Poland had done very much to secure the external borders. But Mr. Vadapul said that he wants to make it as easy as possible with minimal checks on those Poles that commute daily across the border. Now, what that means in terms of real practical policy, we'll have to wait and see. Now, with these two, though, it was clear that there was a lot of common ground. Ultimately, it's a warm relationship between these two individuals. They've had meetings even before Mr. Vadapul came into office. Now, judging by the warm reception, their warm words, and also Mr. Vadapul praising the Sikorski on having close connections with the two of them, talking about many, many issues, that despite potentially a new president, that those relationships between Warsaw and Poland will continue to be strong. Sasha Farbach for TVP World in Berlin.
It's a day meant to reflect on the youngest victims of war, the children. Wednesday marks the International Day of Innocent Children Victims of Aggression. And in Ukraine, the sorrow runs deep. President Volodymyr Zelenskyy is calling for global solidarity to remember the youth lost to Russian missiles and to seek justice for the lives which ended much too soon. Our Diana Skaya brings us this powerful story of loss and resilience.
Must put pressure on Russia, These Ukrainian children didn't know it would be their last day. This is 4-year-old Liza. She was on her way home from a doctor's appointment when Russian missiles struck the city of Vinica. Timofil, just 3, was playing in a park in Kryvyi Rih when a Russian missile hit the playground. His life was cut short mid-laughter. Margarita, 12, was killed in her sleep when a Russian drone hit her room in Dnipro. And Serhiy, a newborn, lost his life due to a Russian missile that struck a maternity ward in Zaporizhia. The list is long. On June 4, the world commemorates innocent children affected by violence. In Ukraine, however, this day is marked by profound grief in memory of the children who perished as a result of Russia's full-scale invasion and of those who were ripped from their homes, taken across the border, and remain missing. According to Ukraine's Minister of Foreign Affairs Andriy Sybiha, the numbers speak for themselves.
Russia killed at least 631 Ukrainian children and injured 1,971 others in the course of this aggression against Ukraine. This loss causes incomprehensible pain. The world cannot forget or forgive such crimes. There must be justice for the innocent young lives that have been cut short by Russia's criminal aggression.
According to Ukraine's Interior Ministry, Russia has also deported or forcibly moved 19,546 children from Ukraine. Over 1.6 million kids remain on the occupied territories, and at least 2,244 children are officially listed as missing. But in the midst of this humanitarian crisis, a Ukrainian NGO, Save Ukraine, is working around the clock to return abducted children back home. Founded by war veterans, the organization leads complex rescue missions, often inside Russian-held territory, and supports children in one of their 6 rehabilitation centers as they slowly reintegrate back into Ukrainian society after experiencing forced Russification and indoctrination.
We rescue 665 children, included 146 orphans. Save Ukraine is a part of initiative of Bring Kids Back, and our main task not only rescue these children and return them to their home, to their parents, and to recovery their mental health, their physical health, and also reintegrate them to the local community. Some children have Russian passport or Russian birth certificate. Then we started our rescue mission. It all depends on a unique case.
And in a call for solidarity, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy took to his social media, urging the world to not only remember these young lives, but to stand united in seeking justice and holding Russia accountable.
In memory of every child killed, in memory of every human life destroyed, there must be real global solidarity from all across Europe, all across the US and all other parts of the world, so that Russia is held accountable for its actions and is forced to return the peace it stole from Ukraine and Ukrainians.
These empty bus seats where stuffed animals are buckled in place of Ukrainian children stand today as solemn symbols of lives interrupted, dreams left unfulfilled, and childhood stolen too soon. And on the day that is meant to protect innocence, Ukraine is still fighting for its children to come home. Diana Skaya for TVP World in Warsaw.
Watching a report like this, it's impossible not to get emotional. But now we're moving on to our final interview. Putin told me that he would have to respond to the Ukrainian attack on airports, said Donald Trump. The two leaders spoke for an hour. Earlier, Zelenskyy proposed a meeting with Putin and a ceasefire. Moscow responded that it would not negotiate with terrorists. Joining me now to discuss the latest is Julia Osmolovska, director at Globsec Kyiv. Good evening, and thank you for joining me on the program.
Good evening.
So we've had some recent developments right before the start of the show, but we did not miss them, so let's begin there. Trump spoke to Putin for over an hour. He said that, I quote, "The conversation was good, but will not immediately lead to peace." How do you read into this moving forward?
Well, definitely, probably the most questionable part of this comment of Donald Trump in his post was that he was actually saying that Putin is going to retaliate. He explained this to Donald Trump, but no single words of condemning these actions or condemning these intentions or actually indicating that this was a justifiable response to Russian terroristic attacks by these fighter jets and missiles sent over Ukraine. So this is something that is definitely missing from this post. But our recent news that I'm just reading as that Trump has allegedly withdrawn this post from his social media. So it would be very interesting to see where eventually we end up with it. But if we stick to this statement, so it's quite obvious that Putin tried to show to Trump his own vision of reality. And basically, if you listen to his press conference with his government officials earlier today, Putin was questioning whether it's still possible to negotiate with terrorists, indicating Ukrainians as a terrorist. So I think it's completely perversion of reality. And this is something we need to tackle at the moment.
And this is not the first time reality is being twisted in such way by the Russian authorities. You mentioned that Putin said that he would retaliate. That was my next point of our conversation. After the spiderweb operation, do you think that Ukraine is to fear the most? Because we did in fact hear that Putin is going to retaliate.
Well, it's actually natural, something natural to expect from a person like Putin and Russian Federation.
But I mean the extent
they need to show some... Say it again?
I mean the extent to which Russia is going to respond, especially considering the losses that Russia suffered.
Yes, that's the question. So but we still think that they're going to do something. At least they can still terrorize the population in Ukraine by sending multiple drones overnight, and people are forced to stay in shelters all the night through. And it's quite exhausting, I have to confess. So even if you don't have the missiles that you send over the country, so you can still make all the country, the population tensed with all these drone attacks. So this is something that they could launch like in multiple numbers, a lot of days in line. So, and it's going to be quite exhausting, definitely.
According to Kremlin, Putin also spoke to the Pope. Why would he speak to the Pope? What do you think? What happened there? Do you think that it has something to do with the over 1 hour long conversation with Donald Trump?
I think that this is also part of the strategy of Russia, try to promote their own narratives about what's going on. And We know that one of the first statements and comments on the Russian waged war in Ukraine by the Pope were quite sympathetic to Ukraine's position. So I think Russians will be trying to do everything just to make at least the Pope questioning whether he understands the situation right. So also he might be complaining again to the Pope with the same rhetoric, like Ukrainians are terrorists and so on, trying to pursue the Pope to see the way the situation the way Putin sees it and promote. So this is something that I think the part of the biggest strategy to get more people aligned with the Russian view of the situation.
Mm-hmm. During a briefing in Kyiv, President Zelenskyy said, I quote, "My proposal, which I believe our partners can support, is that we propose to Russians a ceasefire until the leaders meet," end quote. Do you think that Putin is finally going to meet with Volodymyr Zelenskyy face to face, or is it still just a big game for him?
I think at the moment it's still a big game for him because time and time again Putin raises questions about Zelensky's legitimacy. So at the end he was again addressing today his appearance to his officials. He was saying the same. In the memorandum that Russians suggested for Ukrainians to consider and eventually sign this peace settlement agreement, there is also a provision that elections should be held inside Ukraine within the next 100 days after the signing of this memorandum. So this is something that they will be doing definitely. But in conflicts like that, I think there is a complete different logic that should be followed. So because the issue is so big, it requires the immediate involvement of the highest level. So I think that the president should meet first, and then all the delegations should be agreeing on all these technical details. This is how this logic would work, not the other way around, especially with a country like Russia, where not the decisions are taken at the lowest level and then they are approved by the highest level, the other way around. So they have to authorize actually delegation to follow the conclusion or the vision of the leader. This is why if there is no meeting as such on the horizon, that means that Russians are still pursuing the same strategy and it hasn't been changed by his leader. And they will be pushing again with all these demands that has nothing to do with the actual reality. Because if you analyze the memorandum, the provisions that are in it, so it's rather more it's more equal to the situation when Kyiv is captured and the government is forced to sign a capitulation rather than the response to the reality on the front line. Russians can still make significant advancements there. And on the background of all these special operations that Ukraine's undertook on the Russian territory, so these demands in the memorandums, they seem are quite strange.
Mm-hmm. Last but not least, I mentioned earlier in the program that diplomacy happens not only on the front line, but also in diplomatic settings. Andriy Yermak, the chief of staff, he made his way to the U.S. What was the goal of the meeting, and do you think that the goal that he had in mind was actually achieved?
The most important, actually, to keep the communication channel open and to let America to brief America on everything which is going on in communications and consultations with the Russian side, because as far as we know, Russians had been insisting of not having the US representatives at this round of talks, but because America still has an interest of being involved and trying to mediate this between Ukraine and Russia. So it's very important for Americans to actually follow the developments. And I think that this is probably one of the key missions of the delegation there. But apart from that, we also know that there are meetings at the Congress. So the apparent talks on the Russian Sanctions Act should be in there, and also the critical minerals agreement. So plenty of stuff on the table, and it's very good that we have this opportunity to brief the American counterparts from the first hand.
Thank you so much, Julia Osmolovska, director at Globsec Kyiv. Thank you so much for joining me on the program. It's always a pleasure. And so this would be all for now here on World News Tonight, but please do stay tuned. We're back in just a moment with more news and features, and we hope to see you there.